Right everyone, WeaponCollector here. Right, I thought I'd show you a way to make a leather sheath without using any leather working tools. So this will all be stuff that most people will have, very simple tools. So we'll go over the leather first and the size of the knife. So this knife is about 8 inches long with a 4-inch blade, similar to a Mora type knife. I'll tell you how to measure the leather to the knife basically. So what you are going to want is the leather needs to be at least 8mm wider on both sides and the end, so longer than the blade. So let's say we mark the blade where the hilt is, just there. You need 8mm this side, at the end and here, and this is to get these pieces of leather down the sides so that the blade can slot in. And you can do these same measurements with any knife. So there's where the hilt is. You need enough leather to fold under and go over by about 8mm again. So place that on. So you've got the 8mm gap there, and then you've got enough here still for a belt loop. And then the only other leather you need is from where this line is exactly the same as that. So there's that. And then you just need some bits to go there and there. And then a part for the strap, and that is normally, you can normally just measure that with a tape measure or a piece of card. So wrap it round and just make sure it folds over so that you've got enough to get a popper on and off. So for this knife, which is 8 inches long and 3 centimeters wide, you would need a piece of leather 12 inches by 4 inches, and that would be plenty of leather. And the tools that you're going to need is a pair of scissors and probably a sharp knife, some super glue if you want to do this quickly, or some PVA glue, wood glue will do. But if you want to do it quick, that's the quickest stuff to use. Pencil, a needle and thread. This is proper leather working thread, but any thick thread will work. Possibly a tape measure, a piece of wood and some sandpaper. And possibly an awl or a drill with a 2mm drill bit in it, which I'll show you later. The only optional extra I would suggest buying are these little poppers. You can buy these reasonably cheap for about £5, and you get the tools with it. So you get these tools to set them. Quite a good price really, and it does make for a good clasp on the sheath. But otherwise it's very difficult to do a clasp unless you've got these poppers on. As I say, £5 to buy the set, and you can get the tools with it. But I'll try and show you how to do it. If you just buy these, I'll see if I can show you how to do it without the tools. Right, so first thing you want to do, take your leather. You'll probably have a big piece of leather, and I'll show you how to cut out the bits you want. So the first part will be the full length, 12 inches. Give it 8mm at the end, 8mm on both sides. Mark where the handle comes to. Make sure you've got enough to come under, as I said, about 8mm. So the line is there, put that round the back. That can fold over by 8mm. So around about there. This part is exactly the same length up to that line. and then you just want to cut the bit for the clasp, which is around about 18mm wide and 4 inches long, but that depends on the thickness of your blade. So the first thing I would suggest doing is creating the clasp, so we can sew that on first, because that'll be difficult to sew on last. So you want to take your longest piece of leather, the rough side facing you, fold the belt loop over so it's to the 8mm position. Take this part and just place it over, just so you know that that's about right. So if you see there, it's under by about 8-10mm, creating a little belt loop there. Place your knife onto as far as it would go, and then mark where you want the clasp. So I'm going to have mine around about there, because this is going to be connected on now. So mark for where you want it to go round, and mark the front and back of the blade. So you should have like some marks like that. Can you see those on there? What we want to do now is place your bit of clasp leather over, mark the actual thickness that it is. So that's the true thickness. And then where your lines were on the sides, draw those in. And you're now going to want to cut a line from there to there to there to there. So cut along that way and that way, so this can be slid in and under. So probably the easiest way to do this is just to carefully, slowly score it very gently with a knife, and then just keep going deeper and deeper. If you've got some kind of hole punch, it's nice to put a hole at the top and bottom, and you can cut in between those. But as long as you're slow with this first cut, you can just gradually keep going deeper and deeper till you cut right through. The thickness of this leather though, you may need to do a line parallel to that one and cut that actual section out, which is why sometimes a hole punch helps, because you can just cut through the circle. So just keep doing those two until you've got slots. So cut all the way through, these aren't the way through yet, cut that way, cut these little slots out. Right, so once you've done your two little slots, if you don't have a punch, get a little flathead screwdriver, hold it at the top, punch that through, hold it at the bottom, punch that through, and there you go, you can get your little slot out quite nicely then. So that's probably the easiest way to do it without proper tools. You could probably also use a chisel to do this, to do the lines, instead of using a knife. So place a chisel on, chisel, 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 and then get a little flat screwdriver just to knock out both the top bits. So you need to make sure that that will go over, and then this part can go over enough to create the little clasp. So once you know that that definitely will work, you can sort of open it up again. And then we'll connect these two parts. So you need those two bits and those two. So what you need to do, on the bit that's underneath, we need to fit one of these. So the first thing you need to do is drill a hole. Depending on what you've got, if you've got the little hole punches, do it with a hole punch. But if you haven't, you're going to have to drill a hole here around about 4mm thick, basically the thickness of that little thing there, that pillar. Right, so that's the 4mm drill hole, done very slowly. From underneath, you want to press this through. And then this one goes on top. But you're going to need something to stamp that down with. So I found one of the things that fits these reasonably well is a screwdriver handle that takes bits, if that makes sense. I'll show you what I mean. So basically one of these will fit perfectly over this. Do you want this on a hard surface? Obviously yours would have a handle on, this is just one that's broken, so it's perfect for me. And there you go, that's on. So that's the first part of the clasp. So that would go underneath, and then the other one would go on top. So this time you need to drill a slightly bigger hole to accommodate for that collar there. So maybe 5 or 6mm for this one. Very, very slowly. If you drill slowly, you should just gently cut away the leather rather than ripping it. Right, there we go. So now for this one, and then you have the back one going on like that. So to connect this one in, you're going to want something like a nail should do, quite a large nail. You need to open up, basically, see that part there? That needs to be splayed out. So a nail should work. Something with a spike on it, basically. If you know, you could have bought the tools with this if you wanted to, like I said. But if you haven't got them, you can do it without. Right, so on a hard surface again, place that on. Make sure you're pressing down on both parts, and then gently tap. And that should splayed that out. Yep, looks pretty good to me. And then that will go on as the collar. So what we can do now is, mine's obviously on the side slightly here, so I'm going to have to cut off some of this. You want to round over these edges as well. You can leave this in while you do this, just pull it to one side, and now you basically just want to cut along and cut the corners off. Like that. And do that on both parts. Once you've got your clasp done, make sure you've got it the way you want it. So if you don't want it that way, take it out and turn it round, because that is the way it'll be when it's open, so you'll be doing it that way with your thumb, which is probably the right-handed way, I'd say. Mine's really tight in here, but I want to show you how to stitch this on, so make sure that's in exactly the right place. Now you can either do this with an awl or a drill bit, or even a small nail will do, but you'll find the nails can be hard to pull out. So now you want to put 2 holes right through both bits of leather in the middle, basically, about 4mm apart, which I'll show you now. As I say, you can use a drill or an awl. or a nail even, as I say, but it'll be hard to get a nail out of this, especially this thickness leather. So now what we can do, we can sew a stitch through that to stop that clasp moving at all. So any thread, doesn't really matter what it is. You can use any cotton really. But the thicker the better. I would definitely recommend getting the thickest stuff you can. If you're going to have to buy this stuff, you might as well get, while you're at it, some proper thread. That one doesn't actually say what it is, but it is like leather waxed. It's waxed thread for leather work. So what I do, I double my thread over. I get both the ends the same. I don't do the saddle stitch. You can do the saddle stitch if you want to attempt that, but you wouldn't do saddle stitch with this part anyway. So I double the thread over, so you can see there's two bits there. Start on the bottom side. You know, this is just going to be a very simple bit of stitching, just going in and out basically. You could tie a knot straight away if you want to. I don't bother with this just because you don't really need to. Right, so just go through 1 or 2 times. That will do it, because it's just so that this doesn't move. So put it nice and tight. You could use any colour as well. So that is what you'll see on the front. The back now, all you need to do is tie a knot and then cut it off. So cut that off, leaving a little bit. This will never be seen anyway, but what you can now do is just burn those 2 bits and then flatten them down. And then what you can do, if you've got room, there you go, that's nice and compact. That will never come out now. That will be folded over like that, and it's completely hidden. You've got your belt loop. This can be higher up as well, depending on where you like it. Some people prefer them higher up, some people prefer them, I prefer them lower. So what we'll do now, we'll start actually putting the sheath together. You have to do this bit first, because you won't be able to do it afterwards. I would suggest at this point, if you can, give this a bit of a sand, these rough edges, with a bit of sandpaper, just on the edge of the clasp, just to tidy it up a little bit. But we can tidy any of the edges up a little bit more later. So what we need to do now is prepare this part here to be stitched to there, and what we're going to need to do is turn this over, mark again about 8mm, and we're going to shave off some of the leather to sort of taper it out a bit. I'll show you if this knife's sharp enough. I'm not sure if it'll be sharp enough, but we'll cut a bit off of this. Gradually tapering it back so that that edge fit on there and it'll be a lot thinner. But you don't want to make it steps, you just want to gradually taper it. You could as well sand it so it's tapered. But keep working at that edge until that is tapered out really quite thin, about half as thick as it was originally, so that when you sew that on there's less of a lip. So mine's been tapered down about half, I don't know how well you can see that, but that will then sit on there and that will be less of a lip when the knife is going in and out. We now want to stick this edge onto here. Before you do that, make sure you've got it overlapping enough. As you can see, sorry, I went this way, there. Right, I'm going to put another line because I want mine to be over at least sort of 8mm. So I use super glue for this. If you use super glue though, you will need to clamp this down because these edges are quite rough. They won't stick. Super glue is better for smoother surfaces. So you need to glue it and then clamp it. I put it in a vise normally. So I'll just put some super glue on this edge. And then down here. You can use any glue, but if you use super glue, you only need to wait a couple of minutes and you can carry on with the project. Otherwise, you will need to wait a lot longer. So you just want to clamp this now any way you can. So once that's clamped, that can be left a couple of minutes and then it'll be ready to sew. Right, once that's glued down, you've then got your belt loop and your strap. You want to get your awl or whatever you're using and mark maybe, I don't know, we'll do a line about there to there, so 1, 2, 3, about 5, put about 5 holes in there along that line. This is to put a line of stitching through. So there's the holes done. I would recommend on this side you want to cut a little groove along those lines. So in between the holes, cut out a little bit of the leather so it creates a little channel. And what this will do, it will allow the thread to stick under so it's flush, rather than creating like a bump that the blade could catch onto. Right, so we've got a little groove now. You can make that slightly deeper with a piece of sandpaper. Won't go too mad though. Just so it's deep enough for the thread to sit under or flush. So now you can sew this. I would recommend starting from the back, go in and out. I'll try and show you quickly if I've got enough here. So double thread again, start in the back, leave a bit hanging out the back, go in, like this, keep going like this, and it will leave gaps, and then what you do on the way back, you fill in the gaps. So now you go back and then that fills in that gap. There you go, that's that stitched. Pull those tight, and that's flush so that the knife should be able to pass over that. Lovely, you'll never catch that. So now you want to just do what you did with the other bit, tie the knot, burn it, flatten it down with a hammer. We can start working on shaping the sheath now. So what I'm going to do, I want to cut a little bit out of here, just because I want my blade to sort of sit in a little bit. So I'm going to just cut the shape of this because it's not straight, so that it will fit in like that. But that's not a necessity, it's just something I want to do with mine. So I'm going to cut that out so that the blade will sit in there, hopefully. Actually, I probably don't need to do as much as that. Right. That's personal preference, that is. What you want to do now is make sure you've got this left-handed or right-handed. So this is obviously right-handed. So I would want the knife that way. Get it in the position you want, and then you want to, so following how much you've got here and here, you want to follow the profile of the blade. So you're going to have it like this. Okay, that's how I'm going to have mine. And I might do, you could make this pointed if you wanted. I'm going to have mine flat, and I may put a little loop there. Not 100% sure yet. But can you see that? So cut that off now, and then you can place this on and match it the other way. So this is basically just shaping the sheath to the knife. You could have it rectangular if you want to, some people do. You don't have to have the sheath as thick as this either. I like to have them quite wide. You can get a better stitch line going then if you're doing it without the proper tools. But you can go a little bit thinner. Right, so once you've done that, you now want to glue on these parts. So ignore this pattern on here. So what I'd recommend, put this on, mark how far up that needs to go, should be about there. So mark how far you need to come up to, and then you're going to glue this on so that it basically follows the line of the sheath. So I'd recommend putting that on, put it on there, mark that along, that'll need to be cut off there, I think, yep. So that one can be glued on, and the easiest way to do this is with pegs, clothes pegs. So run your line. These bits, if I didn't show you how to cut these are approximately 8mm, and these are the spacers. So yeah, same thickness. It's easier to do one, and then you want to cut another one. This is why I've got a piece like this, because it will fit on perfectly. But you'll just have to cut that out, and you'll have a bit of offcuts as well. Don't need to taper it back here either, because if that sits on fatter, it will enable the knife to go through easier. So put some glue along, and then clamp it. But you will need to clamp these, because where this is quite rough, the super glue doesn't really want to stick very well. Right, make sure that ends right. So then these just want to be placed on flush with the edges. Just check it. Right. So that's that side on. Once that's on, you want to cut the other side and glue that on. I'll come back once I've stuck both bits on. So once you've glued these two bits on, you can now glue this bit on top of that. So the exact same process, just put the glue on, clamp it on, and then we're getting there. It might be easier to do one side than another, depending on how many little clamps you've got or how you're clamping it. And just make sure all the edges are flush. What you want to do now is, when this is stuck down, you want to mark a line about 4mm in. This is where we're going to put the stitch line. So a bit like that. I'm not sure how well you can see this. Problem is I've got a window just there and it shines the light down, making it quite difficult to see sometimes. So anyway, put a 4mm line around the edge. To get the stitches nice and even, you could measure them if you want to, but you might be able to use a fork to just mark the stitch lines. So just get a fork and press that in. It's not going to be great, but it should give you enough of little dimples to be able to stitch a nice even line. So that's all this is. This is just essentially just marking a nice even set of holes. But you could measure these, or you could just do it by eye if you want to. You could actually, if you wanted to, I've got a video showing how to do this. Take a fork, hammer it flat, cut it off about there, and you can actually use that like an actual proper pricking fork then. I'll show you. So this is a homemade pricking iron made from a fork. And this you can hold it on and hit with a hammer to actually get the better marks. But a fork will mark. As I say, it's not great, but it has actually marked it. So now you should have a load of little dimples all the way along for the holes. There's a couple of ways you can do this. I would recommend drilling it personally, but you can do this with an awl. But it's going to be difficult purely because of how much material you've got to hammer through. But it will work with just an awl. So you basically follow the dimples along, hammering through with the awl if you want to use an awl, but you've got to make sure you go all the way through both sides. Right, I would say this drill bit's slightly too big, but it doesn't really matter. Right, this can be stitched now, so I've doubled up the thread again. It's about maybe a metre long. What I tend to do, I'll start in this back section, doing the exact same stitching I did in the other places, but I'll only stitch to here, and then I'll stitch back, and then I'll do the same here, and then stitch back. Because otherwise you've got to go all the way like that, and it may not be long enough. At least if you go to here and here, cut it off, and then you start again there. So it'll just be the same as always. Leave a little bit at the back, pass it in and out. You want to be careful that you're not catching it on things as you go along, just like that. Make sure the threads are nice and tight every time as well. So you can see the beginning of the stitching there. I'll go all the way along, then I'll go back again and then tie it off. Right, so I've stitched all the way down, stitched back. I would recommend on this top bit you go through a couple of times just to strengthen up the stitching there. I would recommend going through that part a couple of times just to strengthen it up. And then once you're done, tie it off, knot it, burn it, hammer it down, and then do the same this side. Right, so we've got a basic working sheath now. What we want to do now is finish it off. So, you want some sandpaper first, and you want to sand these edges so they're flush, basically, so they're level. I would recommend as well taking off the edge ever so slightly, because we don't have an edge beveler. It'll probably be better now to sand the corners off a little bit. So just keep doing that all around. You probably don't need to do it so much here because it's not too bad anyway. But just keep going around all the edges until they're level, and then we can start burnishing the edges. So once you've sanded down the edges, trying to get rid of these lumps because they will curl over. The problem is there's not a lot you can really do without a tool to cut those edges off apart from sanding them. What we want to do now is burnish the edge. So you want to wet the edge. You don't soak it. I just put some water on the end of my fingers, rub it on, and then any smooth piece of wood. This is a burnisher I made. I can show you how to make this, but let's just pretend this was just a piece of wood. You just rub this on the edge here. When I'm doing it this way, I'm pushing down that edge so it doesn't start curling over. You don't need to push this hard, it's more about friction than pressure. Just keep rubbing and rubbing and rubbing, and you'll see that it starts to go sort of smooth and shiny. So you want to do that on this part here, all of the rough edges basically, so just wet them and rub it over with the piece of wood. So I will carry on doing that. Right, you want to give this a good clean now. So I'm just using a bit of nail varnish remover to get any dirt off for when we stain it. And I'm going to attempt to do a homemade stain for this, so we'll see if it works or not. If you see any little white bits like here and here, that's little bits of glue. Try and get those off if you can, because some stains won't go through that. My homemade Stain may go through it anyway though. So let that dry, and we'll attempt to stain this with a homemade stain. Right, homemade stain, let's see how it works. I've basically got some moonshine in here and a tea bag. I'm hoping that should work like an alcohol based dye. We'll see. It may not at all though. Right, hard to tell on that bit. Let's see. I wonder if you put coffee in this would work as well. It's hard to tell whether that's just if it's darkening it or not. It's probably not. Probably wetting it. Oh, that seems to have made a bit of colour on there. I'm not really too fussed because when I put I'm going to put this wax on it now, which protects it, softens it, and makes it a bit more waterproof. This always sort of darkens them off a bit anyway. So I would recommend waxing your sheath, and then it's done basically. Get a good old lot of wax rubbed in this, and then before I go I'll just talk about it. So there's one little leather sheath that you can make for any knife. The only things I would do differently or recommend to you if you're doing this, I would definitely say if you're going to buy these poppers, definitely get the tools to set them. You'll set them a lot better and easier, because if you're going to buy the leather, the thread and the poppers, you may as well get the popper tools. You don't need the other tools, but the tools to set the poppers. It's so much easier, and they do give you a hole punch as well. And when you do these holes, I would recommend drilling them personally, because what can happen is you can get a bit of a wonky edge on the back. Now that doesn't really matter, you're never going to see that anyway, but when you do it with a awl, when it goes through, sometimes it's not straight. When you drill, you'll get a nice, as you can see, the stitching on the front is reasonable, but the back is slightly off. But again, like I said, that doesn't really matter. It's not going to affect anything apart from looks. But if you drill it, I drill all of mine, and I can get it looking really nice both sides that way. Yeah, I'm happy with that, considering that's a sheath made with no leather working tools at all. If you've got leather working tools, you can take the edges off, you can burnish slightly better, and you probably have some dye to be able to dye this. But yeah, I think for the tools that was used, I think that came out pretty good, and that would be an absolutely rock solid sheath, as sturdy as any you could buy. Doesn't take a lot to make really, and you can do this to any shape. But that's the most basic sheath you could do with the absolute minimum tools. If you put any money into any tools, you'll up the workmanship of the sheath basically. But yeah, with the absolute bare minimum tools, you can make an alright sheath, I think. And that would last a long time, I reckon. Right, I hope you enjoyed the video, I hope you found it helpful. If you need any of the stuff, have a look in the description, and there'll be links to leather, poppers, anything like that. And if you wanted to get some extra tools, get some tools as well. Alright, hope you enjoyed the video, hope you found it helpful. See you later.